I'm delighted to be here, support this event, and provide some sponsorship from the Knowledge Transfer Network. It's a government agency aimed at encouraging innovation. My responsibilities in the Knowledge Transfer Network include cloud, big data, and of course we're interested in leading on Internet of Things as well. So this session on smart cities is right down the middle for us. When Nick Bromley, who's standing by the podium here, came to me and wanted to talk about, how can we do something in this area, and I discovered from Andy and Stuart that Big Data Week was running, it seemed an obvious thing to do for us to combine forces and to bring a session here. So I'm very grateful that Nick's done all the legwork of putting together a session, even to the point of writing the description for you. I've just turned up to chair the panel, which is quite nice from my perspective. And the panel is terrific. We have two of the pioneers from London Datastore 1.0 here, Emer Coleman and Jonathan Raper, sitting beside me. You're going to hear from them in a minute about that work, where it's led. In Jonathan's case, we have, well, in fact, they're both working for Placr now, and Jonathan will tell you more about that. And then Margarethe Theseira, sitting next to Jonathan, is going to look from GLA's perspective towards the iCity idea. So we're going to kick off, and then we'll have time for a bit of discussion, which will be my job to facilitate. We're going to kick off with 2 or 3 short presentations, starting with Nick, then Emer and Jonathan doing a double act, and then Margaret to follow. So, Nick.
Thanks, Ian. Is this working okay? Can you all hear me? Yes. Good, excellent. Right. Well, I actually come from a technology background myself. I used to work for Fujitsu, worked for Nokia, and set up an autonomy reseller. And actually, what's always interested me is what you can do with computers rather than just the technology per se. And I think we've heard a lot of push already this morning about, the stuff in the boxes, etc. But I think what interests me more now is what are we going to do with big data? Why do we need it? And those of you who are developers here or technologists might be more interested in that, because ultimately that's going to guide your future. So when I first met Ian, I was actually working for Transport for London. This is a problem that I had to deal with, which was does anybody recognise this bit of London? Well done. This is Elephant and Castle, and you may know that Lend-Lease are actually putting in a big £1.5 billion development in that part of London. Now, what's interesting about it is TfL knows all about the buses, know all about the tube, but they know a little bit about the cars, but actually they know nothing about the movement of people in that part of the city. So what interested me, and this is the right reason why I went to speak to Ian, was to say, how could we better understand how people move through the capital? And actually, it's been a bit of a journey, really, into big data in how we understand that. Now, I'm not going to go through all these slides in detail, but there are some key things that you need to overcome in the practicalities of big data. And the first one is, you'll see a headline there, Information Age arrives in the transport sector. When do you think that heading appeared in a magazine, in a transport magazine? Go on.
2007.
In the 50s? Right, yeah. It sounds 50s, doesn't it? Some say 80s, some say 90s. Shall I tell you when it was? Yeah. That was September 2010. Okay, so that gives you, for those of you who develop code, trying to make some money in this out of big data, that's the thing you've got to be aware of. That actually it's more of a change program than anything else at the moment. It's about getting the people who need to access data and analyse data. It's about getting them on side and getting them using it. So a smart city, what is it? Well, it's when investments in human and social capital, buildings, transport and modern computer systems and ICT infrastructure fuels sustainable economic growth and high quality of life, etc. In other words, it's not just about technology. And London's a smart city, I think. Well, first of all, it'll follow the mayoral strategy and London plan. It'll follow government policy on this. It'll be democratic and beneficial to everyone. It'll have a systems approach. But this is the key thing. I think data will become a utility in the future. So at the moment, you talk to any developers, and they'll talk about, waste, water, electricity. They'll talk about transportation, etc. Rarely, if ever, do they ever talk about data as being a service, a utility, as they design and build these big projects. And I think whatever we do, we have to build on what we already have there, which is London Datastore, and how we then integrate it with this EU programme that Margarette's going to tell you about, called iCity. Now, one of the other radical things I did early on was actually take a systems approach to what a smart city should be. And I won't bamboozle you with this, but I actually did this bit of work for the Institute for Sustainability about 3 years ago. But the other worrying thing is the lack of systems thinking as people talk about smart cities. So not much recognition of the importance of data, not much systems thinking. And the interesting thing about the data actually is at the moment and this is a technology strategy board slide, but at the moment our ability to extract value from data and the access we have to valuable data is by and large sat in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And if you really want to get value out of the data you've got, then you've got to move it up into that top right-hand quadrant. And this gives you an idea of the kinds of scales of problems that we now have in cities. Cities are basically about balancing capacity with demand. And our forefathers, the Victorians, actually had the advantage that they could pretty much build anything to any scale, and they over-engineered the entire system. Interestingly, when I was at TfL, it was very much in problem management mode, reacting all the time. And one of the things I was trying to get into my work was a predictive way of using data, actually extract data in advance, use it to do analysis, better predict what the demand is across the network, balance capacity with demand. It sounds very basic, doesn't it? And to most IT people who size, specify network servers and put this together all the time, it seems pretty elementary. But interestingly, little of that actually happens within, most of it's based on assumptions. And of course, you know, with small data sets, large numbers of assumptions, you often get it wrong. And I think this is a point to come out of what Ken was saying this morning. With massive amount of data, you no longer have to build these correlation models. You can basically work with the truth as it stands. You'll hear more about the iCity data platform, but this is pretty much what it's going to look like. One of the key things that I'm keen to do now is to actually develop what we're going to call an open city architecture, because you'll talk to people like IBM and they've had big data for years. You've got HP, Fujitsu, you know, you can go through the whole list of people and they'll all say they've got big data and they've got an enterprise architecture. The trick is, how does this all fit together? And the thing that I'm working on really with the team is how we're going to bring Internet of Things, open data and open infrastructure, which you can hear more about, with private data, which is things like the mobile phone operators I just showed you, and how you bring that together to provide some form of solution. The challenge at the moment really for us is defining what these solutions are going to be, what the communities of use are or the use cases are in the future. And I know we're going to have a bit of a debate about this in a moment, but one of the key challenges we've got is how do we get the data that's already in the public sector or public sources unlocked and out there so people can use it to develop those solutions with. And this is the kind of model we've been looking at. You'll see here we've got datafication, aggregation and correlation of being our principal activities.
Super. Right, so the nice thing is we can start from people who's got experience of doing it before. So we'll now turn back a little bit and go back to where we were, was it 4 years ago, Jonathan?
2009.
2009.
Well,
so,
actually before that.
yeah. So we've got Jonathan and Emer.
It's in
Okay, hi everybody. Hope you're enjoying the activities. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So what I thought I'd do is just wind back a little bit even before 2009, which is when we started scoping the data store first. Just to set it in a policy context, because I think sometimes there are policies that no initiatives actually deliver on, and sometimes you do need policy to actually build initiatives. So in government, you know, it can be quite difficult. And one of the things that the data store came out of was a year-long secondment, which was funded by the GLA, Capital Ambition and DCLG. When I moved from the London Borough of Arnott over to City Hall to do a secondment for a year. And the purpose of that and of those agencies funding that secondment was to look at the state of policy in local authorities across London. And that was 2008, and that was pre the very difficult cuts that were going to have to be made in local authorities. And there was a sense of trying to see how ready people were to make different decisions or to try and do business differently. And so I did a research project for the first 6 months, which tried to look at the state of policy. And what we discovered from that was, you know, local authorities were very well versed in following what the Audit Commission required in terms of ticking boxes. But in terms of a future which was going to have massive cuts, just salami slicing budgets wasn't going to do things, wasn't going to achieve what was required. And in short, what came out of that was we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could get the London boroughs involved in a project that was about collaboration and that we could do something around data. And internationally, the context of that was the Obama memo on open data on his first day in office, and things that were happening like the Apps for Democracy programs. And we thought, well, that seems like a good thing, and let's try and see if we can get the boroughs all to work together. And we felt very much we couldn't ask the boroughs to work together if we didn't have our own functional bodies in order. You'll be aware City Hall has the GLA, Greater London Authority, and then the Mayor has these four bodies underneath, which are Transport for London, the Metropolitan Police Authority, the LDA, as it was then, London Development Agency, and LFIPA, which is Fire and Emergencies. So we thought, okay, let's get our house in order first, and then we'll go and ask the boroughs to collaborate. And that was where that began, and then we looked at how would we best do that. And so we decided, rather than doing what government normally does, which is building something like a portal and then expecting people to come to that, that we would try and do this in an open way. So we put out an open call to London and invited people to City Hall. Oh, am I going backwards? Sorry. To come and help us scope out what that might look like. So you'll just see there's Chris Taggart, who's now the founder of Open Corporates, and Brian Hotley and Christine Chow, who are colleagues of mine in City Hall. We basically put an open call to London and said, we want to release London's public sector data. Will you come and help us? And the fantastic thing about that was we basically listened to the developers who were going to be the first adopters of this data, because there is a sense that you'll get armchair auditors from citizenry, but in the main we do need third-party developers who can make sense of this data to help other people understand it better. And 60 of them turned up to that workshop and really gave us a roadmap, gave me a roadmap about how we might collaborate to make this happen. And then it was hell for leather to actually get something up by January, which we did, when the Mayor launched the Datastore, and that's Jonathan in his bowler hat. That was a live link to CES in, where was that, Austin? Was it the CES link went into? CES in Las Vegas. We were live in Las Vegas, except the awful thing was the link kept dropping when the Mayor was talking. It was like one of those really high-pressure situations. But basically the Mayor had been very committed to the whole idea of transparency very early on when he came into City Hall. So we launched on the 7th of January just with the GLA data sets, 50 of them, and then had a target to get to 250, I think, by the end of January, which my colleagues, two Gareths in City Hall did. And then we began the journey of trying to get the functional bodies to release their data. And I suppose the point about this is, I would say to people all the time, the state can't do this on its own. Because there were so many barriers internally to releasing data. So many people who don't want to have the data released as public officials. And really the model I had was, I was in City Hall, Jonathan and other open data fanatics were outside City Hall, and we kind of worked a sort of double act along with the media to put pressure on the state, even though it was a policy area. And so that's what you get that's what we talk about when we talk about policy dissonance. Because even at one point, this is a famous blog by Malcolm Barkley, who was a developer who had been taking a feed from Transport for London for months and had built very successful apps on it and had a huge consumer base, and Transport for London didn't even know he was in the system. They didn't even realise he was taking the data, and they then attempted to cut him off, and there was absolute uproar. So even though on one hand the state is committed to doing this, somebody in Transport for London had taken a different decision, just arbitrarily really, and you get those kind of policy dissonances. So the release of data in those at that time, and we can talk about how much it's changed, was very much push from the inside, pull from the outside, and then expect all sorts of bumps along the way. So it isn't a linear, rational process of saying, let's do this, this is how we're going to do it. It's full of happenstance and sort of chaos, really. So that's just a little bit of where it began, just in context. So Jonathan, do you want to?
So, in retrospect, that day in October 2009 was the day that I burned my academic career to the ground and started on an entirely new journey, because it was clear that if the state was going to release large amounts of open data, there were going to be massive opportunities to build businesses, to create new value, and to affect the balance of power in all sorts of public debates. And that was an extremely attractive proposition. And so I left the university with a colleague, Dave Mountain. We founded a company called Placr, and we began to build a platform to suck in all of these different data sources and put them to use. Now, the great thing about hindsight is that somebody can crystallise what's happened and show you how you got there. And this is a slide from John Sheridan at the National Archives talking about how a new relationship has grown up between the state and the private sector over the last few years around data. This is the new normal. So you have government as the publisher is putting out data with guarantees. We are the intermediaries, companies, data aggregators, new data companies, and we're providing services on top of that data. So we have to validate it, improve it, check it. There's a lot of cleaning up to do. We have to make it available as a service. We have to scale it. We have to do all those things. Produce services for the consumer who then pay us, and we then help the state maintain the data. So this is a new ecosystem. And of course, that intermediary role, it both a profitable business, but also a new potential policy instrument, because we can hold government to account, and we can produce new kinds of views of data that the state has itself either never done previously, or because there's a whole apparatus of parastatal organisations around data, we can do things that they didn't really want to do. For example, national rail inquiries, I'm sure that almost everybody in this room has used in the last year, has a set of little-known terms and conditions that don't allow you to use any of their data if it brings the rail industry into disrepute. Now, obviously, the rail industry brings itself into disrepute if it's running smelly old trains and always late, etc. And we should be free to say that. This is about bringing new energy, new perspectives into the body politic, as much as it is about publishing new data sets. We can now tell you where the trains are late, and that can be used for people to drive better value in their public services. So there are multiple roles that we're creating by allowing intermediaries access to the value and to the power around data, which of course is becoming central in our society. So from there we move to a whole range of new relationships. So we have built partnerships. We're currently building a partnership with Elgin, which is the national portal for roadworks and diversions, also an open data company, creating new travel focused sites and services. We're bringing together public transport and also traffic and diversions, etc. We've got business-to-business services. We're supplying local authorities. We supply Transport for London with their London Overground live departure boards, for example. And we're supplying apps who are in a kind of long tail of users of data that were never supplied or never served by some of the previous arrangements. And we're also, of course, being open data driven, we're able to work with the open community. We're able to work with OpenStreetMap and to put data and code back into the open community. If we're going to survive, if we're going to prosper, if we're going to become baked into a new dispensation around data, there are certain things, however, that have to be true. The public money behind data has to mean public access. So we're going everywhere, and we're going to ask the question everywhere, is there public money? Yes, let's have access. And in answer to the question, that's going to cost a lot of money to release that data, we say, whatever raw data you've got in the house, put it out the door in whatever lightweight way you can, either as a stream or as a download or as some sort of REST API endpoint. We'll consume that, we'll clean it up, and we'll convey it out to the market or develop things in collaboration with the open community. Free's got to mean under an open license, so that we can build and add value to that without the IPR being on a string. We're in a new ecosystem that's not all about leveraging power around intellectual property. We're about providing excellent services and innovative ideas around data, which people want to buy because they want those services and they want our quality of service. There mustn't be public sector competition. There are too many places in the public sector where there are small, exclusive monopoly relationships between the public sector and the private sector, For example, Cortel distributes all the court service data. Tex and ATEC have an exclusive rights to the edu-based data set, and so on and so forth. Rock, Kitchen and Harris for the police data. All those relationships need to be liberalised to allow anyone to get the data, because some of the greatest uses of the data are going to come from kids in bedrooms, from disruptive influences around data. And we want to enable that, because that's what creates new activity, jobs, growth, cool stuff. We need also equality of access. We've seen on occasions the public sector try to differentiate access according to some model. Everyone has to have the same access. That's how these great new propositions grow. And it all has to be released in an accessible format. There are lots of data sets still out there where the public sector is chucking data over the wall, and we're asking it in raw form, but they won't even document it. And in some cases we need, obviously, the minimum documentation to make use of it. So if that's what we need, what can we do? Well, some of you will have CityMapper as an app in your pocket. If you haven't, you should definitely get it. We supply CityMapper with some of its data, and we've helped them grow over the last few years into being one of the preeminent apps around public transport in London. And so this is a new generation of apps that's built on open data. And this is where that circle is closed, from the public sector releasing data to you getting a cheaper, better app because it's based on open data. Finally, I should say that we are reorganising our offerings behind this brand, transportapi.com. You can go there and get up to 1,000 hits a day on our API for free, and you can then build and scale any proposition that you like on our platform. We don't take ownership of the downstream content. You know, we're having to develop new business models, new licensing terms, because the traditional value-added data businesses, they want to give you very partial sets of rights around data, because obviously if you're successful, they want a slice of every other bit of success that you have out of your innovation and your knowledge. We don't believe that's the way of the future. We believe in partnering with people, enabling new propositions to develop, and we benefit by helping, partnering, delivering the scale, and helping with that growth. So we want to power change and innovation in transport. We want to be a disruptive business, and we're seeing just enormous interest in the things that we're doing at the moment. Transport, of course, is one of those really vital things, and transport, of course, is the area where most open data has been produced. And we need that innovation wave to spread out into all the other areas of government, so that the same kind of liberal releases occur, and so that aggregators like us can come in, disrupt, innovate, enable those new propositions to come out. And although at the moment we're only probably medium-sized data, to be honest, in Big Data Week, we're growing pretty rapidly, and what is currently gigabytes will become terabytes in a very short period of time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, or good afternoon by now, I'm not quite sure. I'm Margarethe Theseira from the Greater London Authority. I'm the Senior Manager of the GLA Intelligence Unit, and two of the Gareths, one of whom's here, helped Emer create the London Datastore, and we've been running it ever since it was created. So I'm going to talk a bit about it, and then I'm also going to talk to you today about iCity, which is a European-funded project that's looking to open up infrastructure, so we can talk about what that means in a little while. Right, so the intelligence unit was initially set up to provide economic and statistical analyses to the GLA group. So our kind of business is analyses, extracting data from official sources, not necessarily providing it out, although we have done that ever since I set the economics function up 10 years ago. Initially it went in the form of spreadsheets to people, because we have to share the data because it's subject to examination in public. So we have this long history prior to the Datastore of enabling spreadsheets to go out. Through the Datastore, we had a much more kind of vigorous voicing of that information, and we also made available things from the finance system and information about MP salaries and expenses. And a lot of the drive from that side came from the Telegraph Group, when they were sharing information about MPs' expenses in 2009. So the kind of initial drive for getting data out from the GLA group is quite long-standing, but the idea that people will be really interested in it only came from about 2009. And that was also when it was starting to be recognised that companies might want to have access to it, and we could start to build some new economic opportunities for people. With the data store, we are now up to 575 data sets on it, but the bulk of these are still spreadsheets. You know, there's sort of things like employment rates that are released every month, or they might be things like birth rates, or information that is generally accessible elsewhere, but what we do is we target it down for a London-specific audience. We've got about... how many people come to the data store each month? There's about 100 apps that we develop and have been developed in-house, and they're aimed at our policy audience. So the policy operators within boroughs, we give them access to information. So that's what we're sharing. The kind of idea of apps that are used more widely definitely comes a lot more from transport data, because that's real time. It's where there is some commercial viability. We held a hack day last year for the environment data to see if we can get more interest in that, and to see what sort of ideas companies were coming back with, and how we could get more traction in trying to change people's behaviour. If they had access to the environment data and could see the kind of damage that their choice of transport mode was doing, how could we encourage behaviour change by the use of different apps? So we came up with a few games that came from that hack experience, but they've yet to be put out to the market and used more widely. So we're still struggling with the idea that how does this actual relationship work between the government, who owns the data, people who want to access the data, and how we may want to share ideas more widely. Right, open data and open innovation. So we heard from Emer and Jonathan about how they see that going forward, which is great. And again, a lot of this is around transport data rather than some of the other data sets on the London Datastore. But one of the examples, as I thought I'd run through, was about the TfL live bus data. To get the API set up to actually share this information more widely was incredibly expensive. It was an afterthought of a project that was running for 4 years. So the idea that we would be able to track buses within Transport for London was set up some time ago, and then with Emer's pushing, I believe, they added the API to actually make that more widely available. The traditional government approach is that you do the development in-house, which is what we've got on this slide, and it is successful. They are sharing information with Londoners and those who use transport, use the transport. And then going forward, through using the API, then others have been able to create additional value and business from it, which is fantastic. I mean, I can't believe it's not that long ago, but you didn't know when your buses were arriving. You used to go to your bus stop, wait, and kind of be thinking, is there one going to be in 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Can't go according to a timetable. Whereas now you can either go to it, and if you don't have an app that works, you know, I've got a BlackBerry, apps on there are dreadful, but at least if I sort of text a number, it does tell me when the bus is going to come back. But friends of mine who I'm very envious of have things like iPhones, and they just stand there and it tells them where they're located and when the bus is next going to come along. Right, some of the examples of the things that have been developed off the back of the London Datastore. We've got the one with the big circles is number of residents by nationality in London. This has been developed by my colleague Gareth Piggott in-house, and it's really just a quick way for those who are operating within the boroughs to kind of understand change, and for people who aren't that technical to actually be able to access some of the information held on the data store. We've also got academic interests, so UCL have developed the movement of Boris bikes, or Barclays Bike Hire Scheme, so that you can see where the most popular routes are, and then some more of the kind of transport apps. The next thing I want to talk about is what iCity is. And iCity is an EU project that started in January 2012. The participating partners are Barcelona, Bologna, Genoa and London. We have Cisco, who are building a platform, and Retavision. They run Luton Airport, in case you haven't heard of them. They're doing the interface to the platform. They're the kind of Spanish equivalent of BT, I believe. We also have City Lab, which is one of the EU Living Lab partners, and they're working out how we can engage with people like yourselves, so developers and technologists, and telling us how best to engage with you. And we have the University of Catalonia, who are doing the lessons learned so that the sharing can be more widely applied to other European cities. So in principle, the iCity platform is going to provide access to infrastructure and link to data sets from across the participating cities, and therefore it will provide economic development opportunities for any developer and widen out the potential audience for your applications. So if you can imagine that you might develop an application that uses TfL bus data, if you then have that same information provided from Barcelona, Bologna and Genoa, you can then, with a bit of magic sort of translation, you could probably do that automatically, knowing you guys, then you can sell that into a much wider audience than just having London data available to you. Right, the types of infrastructure that we're considering, there's a range of sensors, so there's air quality, noise monitoring and radon sensors. Things like private platforms, so City Taxi in Barcelona is signing up to be integrated into this other platform. Automatic bollards, they're quite common in the continent, where you stop cars moving through areas with a bollard that goes up and down, and I think the traditional way is that you actually toot your horn and some guy comes and runs out or pushes a button. They're now going to do something that actually integrates some technology to be able to use that better. Things like cycle hire stations, what more can we do with those in London? They're kind of dotted all over the place. They've got some much more potential than just being used for the cycle hire scheme. Things like CCTV cameras. Whenever I mention that, everyone kind of looks at me in horror and starts talking about data protection and privacy rights, but I'm sure there's all sorts of algorithms you can run on camera imagery that means that people's identity is hidden, and that we could use them. A majority of cameras are along roadways, so there must be some kind of parking app that we'd be able to develop if we shared this camera streams more widely. We've also got London boroughs who have invested a lot of money into optical fibre networks, which they're using to run things like their CCTV cameras, but it doesn't use the full capacity of that network. So if we provided access to those, could we improve things like Wi-Fi for deprived local areas and things like that? For London, the two infrastructures that we're concentrating on to start are King's College Air Quality Sensor Network. This provides hourly index for all of the London sites. We're not trying to replicate, we're not trying to replace what King's College do. They have to do a lot of data quality work and actually checking of what's going on with their information, but we want to make it more widely available. And they're quite keen to work with us because they're working on quite an aged IT system, and so hopefully through our platform they'll better understand the kind of usage that people are putting onto their systems, as well as widen out the number of stakeholders who they can work with. The second one is the Wi-Fi on tube networks. You would have seen that just prior to the Olympics we put Wi-Fi on a number of stations across the tube. We can actually, in theory, because I haven't seen it in practice, understand the movement of people through tube stations if this information is more widely shared. So at the moment you can understand who goes into a tube station and who comes out. So you've got gate access that tells you who's coming in and who's leaving. On your existing transport apps it will tell you when the tube's arriving. What it won't tell you is how many people are on the platform in front of you and the crowding on the platform. And so you don't know whether you'd be able to access that first tube or whether you'd actually have to wait for the second or third tube. Hopefully if we can get the Wi-Fi information more widely shared, then we can build on the existing transport apps, and we can also use it within TfL to improve interchange within stations as we understand how people move through it. That's me for now. So.
Lovely, thank you very much.
So in the spirit of crowdsourcing, it'd be interesting to ask for a question or two from the audience. Have you got any burning questions you'd like to ask? Give your name, please, and then ask the question. Yes. If you shout this way, I'll repeat it if I can. So, or we got a microphone. No, look.
Okay. My name is Mr. Stefano Bonfa. I am from Oxford Sustainable Development Enterprise. It's not Oxford University, but with the collaboration. And we work on smart city. And this is why I'm very interested on, I could say, criticize your approach. Because this is a European fund project. You're talking about, let's say, future cities, smart cities in London. And you are worried on how to improve the situation in London. This means, okay, it's technology put on, transport, bus, all, etc., etc. And what is interesting, you have also the partnership with Barcelona, Genoa, as I understood, in a European project. Now, can you explain to me why this so high unemployment, especially in Spain and Italy, and also here in, let's say, in London? So for me, smart city, if you don't solve, and this means data, if you don't solve the problem of through the data, and therefore through the big data, develop a strategy. That's what EU wants. European Union wants to develop a smart strategy specialization, where through the data, you can create opportunities, job in a long term. It's not just improving the situation. And I see big data, and then we have also created a group in trying to have a more, I do not say integrated approach, but I would say interlinked approach in an intelligent way, where you can first develop the common approach, clearly adapted. Then from the common approach, this means the strategy. Then you start to develop the specialization. What do you need? So in other words, the individual as a citizen can, let's say, benefit of these strategies. Some movement now is starting in Italy. It's called La Rete, this political movement. Why this happens? This happens because Italy was fragmented, no strategy. Now come with this internet government movement where they want to solve the problems. And you can solve, I think the big data is a very good approach. And this you have to think more. Thank you.
So Nick, do you want to talk a little bit about what the objectives are, or Nick and Margaret, I mean, give us a clue about what the frame of reference for this is.
Okay, well, is this working? I mean, the first thing is I'm employed by the GLA, which is obviously London-centric, but we're also working closely with the TSB, and they have a Future Cities team, and they're setting up their catapult in fact, London, and that's happening this year. So I think our thinking and our knowledge will be shared with that team, and of course they're working very closely with Glasgow and Peterborough and Bristol, etc. So whatever we do, I think, will also be shared elsewhere. So I think that's the important thing. But I think the other thing is this is about building an innovation platform in iCity. It's about enabling access to these devices to allow the creativity that you see coming through from people like Jonathan. So and this is where economic value will come, where ideas come out. And
people need strategy more than to have technology. They need to know where to go, how to benefit. Like me, how I can get a job. This is the
okay, no, I appreciate that. Well, there is another piece of work going on, and I can't say too much, but in fact Kit Malthouse has set up something called the Smart London Board, and specifically that is to look at how we can, as you say, develop a smart city strategy. And I've called it Building a Smarter London, and that seems to be catching hold. But the idea being, this is a journey that we're all starting on now. So it's a little bit uncertain what the strategy is going to finally be, but there is a vision, there is a London plan, there are opportunity area plans, and so it's about making all these come together.
Nick, do you... wait for the microphone, please, and introduce yourself.
Hi, Nick Trigg from STFC, one of the research councils. I was interested to know whether there's been any evidence actually of increased use of buses through the fact that these apps are available. People wait for buses because they know it's only a couple of minutes away rather than not wait for them.
Only anecdotally, as far as I know, because of course it's very difficult to net off against general economic changes. But what we can do now is map the pattern of requests that people make for bus information, and so better match demand and supply, because we know where people are asking the question about when is the next bus. Something like 4 to 5 million requests per day are made for bus information in London. So this is a gigantic amount of gigantic number of requests, and so you can actually mine that in order to better understand what experience people are having of buses and what questions they're asking, where they want to go, and so on.
And I mean, a related question is a sort of wider context. Is there any other? Well, what is the sort of ROI, return on investment, sort of discussion that you go through in order to propose these ideas? Is there one, or is it? I mean, it always intuitively this all sounds like a great thing, but I just wondered whether there's a money driver.
Are you asking me why did I become an entrepreneur?
Well, because I'm not, no, because but I'm asking really if whoever it is who commissions these various projects, do they go through an ROI process? And if they do, could you try to explain that?
In the case of the data store, we specifically stayed away from getting into any of those kind of metrics, because that's usually the thing that kills things at a state level, because you've either come up with a figure that nobody's happy with and they don't want to proceed with it. So it was really important for us to get the message through with those. This is emergent technology. With emergence, you can't predict in advance, but you have some instinct that there may be a proposition there. That became very apparent the more data we released. Once real-time data was released, where entrepreneurs could build a business, they did. All right. Now, I don't have metrics on that because I have no way of measuring that except to look at the kind of income tax return that small companies are making, and then you want to take that at scale. But it was a really important policy principle to say we are going on instinct on this. We are going to collaborate with those technologists who have the best instinct on that, those entrepreneurs. And we're going to see what happens. And I think if government could do more of that, it would do a lot more to stimulate economic activity.
Because classically in this situation, the investment required was so small that actually it's not that meaningful a calculation, because all this data already existed. It was, and in some cases, it was even already out there on the web as a service, unacknowledged. So Transport for London had various undocumented endpoints out on the web, which people discovered and then began to use quietly. So the investment required was very small. It's going to be infrastructure. So one of the other things we can say about this kind of investment is we need to look at it as a long-term investment. The railways in Victorian times were not built in a year or two. They were built over a period of 50 years and then consolidated and all that kind of thing. The evidence from Far East, where they are in advance of us in terms of building digital services, is that you get all sorts of secondary businesses built around the first tier of businesses, and that's what we're looking to. We're looking to leadership internationally on that so that we can export the expertise that we develop here.
Yeah. Margaret, go.
My team are actually trying to do a cost-benefit analysis on the London Datastore. It's proving trickier than you would expect for an organisation that sets it up and runs it to get the information about the cost side. So from Transport for London, the different API creation of the APIs is enormously variable. Where it's a new service, it's relatively cheap because it's within the spec. Where it's trying to integrate with legacy systems, it can be very expensive. But in terms of the benefit side, we've done some questionnaires with some developers through the London Datastore, and if you haven't yet replied, get in touch with me because I need to build up some more evidence for their business models and how much their returns are. So we are trying to do that, but actually accessing enough numbers is proving quite tricky. And I know that there was work that was going on by, I think it was Deloitte, who have looked at a wider cost-benefit analysis for open data. So you might want to have a look at that as well.
Nick, you wanted to add something?
Yeah. Before I left TfL, I was actually looking at some of the planning data, and if you look at the modes, which is essentially buses, underground, pedestrian, cycling, etc., what was interesting was cycling is projected over the next 15, 20 years to go up by 50%. Buses is going up very slightly, I think about 5 to 8%. Big increase in pedestrians, the big loser being vehicle traffic. But an interesting example of where TfL isn't using big data, you'll be surprised to know that 80% of the bus routes in London are as they were originally planned back in the 1920s. Now, you're not telling me that the crowds and where people actually live these days haven't changed substantially over almost the last century. So this is, but the challenge is getting access to the data. You know, exactly where are people living now? How do they move around the city? And what they actually use is something called the London Travel Demand Survey. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever looked at this, but essentially they use a survey sample of 8,000 households to represent 8 million people. And the numbers of people actually respond to this is about 17,000, 18,000, roughly 2 per household. Now, it's a randomised sample, but you can guess that is a good example of very small data being extrapolated, correlated, and generally murdered to death to prove a particular set of planning policies, whereas actually they should really be using big data, looking at all households, all movements, everything that's happening on the surface and underground, and then you could properly plan a city of the future.
So another question? Got a couple right at the very back as well. I'm only going to leave a couple of minutes for this, though, because we're going to keep to time. But
Thank you. My name is Vladimir. I work for an online marketing agency called Distill, but I'm just quite interested in spatial data and transport data and stuff like that. And then my question actually ties very well into what Nick just said about government not using the big data. And my question, I think, mainly is to Jonathan and Emer about your organization. When you said that the loop closes with the app like Citymapper, well, to me, it kind of seems like it's kind of just reached the halfway point whereby does any data gets transferred back to the government? Like, you take government data, but do you feed anything back? Or is there actually an interest in TfL in the data of usage of those apps, which obviously can give access to way more data points than transport demand survey? Thank you.
Well, at the moment, fair enough. Let's say we're only halfway around that loop. We do have data sets. Citymapper has those request logs for who's asking what question where. And I have mapped those, and I have looked at who's making the requests, when they're making the requests, where they're planning to travel. But TfL already has its own, intelligence operation from its own data set. So what the challenge for us is to turn our insights into endpoints, which everybody can look at, so that everybody can become a researcher on the basis of what London travellers want. And our aspiration then is to influence public policy, to influence service provision. But if there's one lesson we've learned, obviously, is that although it's very quick to implement endpoints, institutional change and new ways to make decisions are still quite slow, and they take time. And you need good design, you need great engagement processes in order to get those insights out and influencing change.
So in terms of, on this table we've got previous generation and next generation. What advice would you give to next generation, Jonathan and Emer, about things to worry about in their plan?
I think that the hard thing that happens the longer something goes on is to keep it agile. And so, you can get bound into processes when really you just have to try and keep the momentum going and to be agile in that way. And I think that's difficult. Things can become institutionalized, and it's a trick to keeping avenues of communication open with developers, remaining relevant to the community out there. And that takes work, and it takes engagement with that community. So that's my piece of advice.
Back to Sir Isaac Newton, standing on the shoulder of giants. I mean, we've built a platform. We've worked extremely hard over several years to build a platform that brings in every bit of transport information, all the infrastructure information, all the live feeds, harmonised them all, checked them all, brought them to scale. And we now want people to stand on our shoulders and build the insanely great apps around transport, woven into the fabric of life so that people can make their lives more rewarding, more efficient, can use transport more efficiently, and so on. That was the whole proposition behind building a platform, to let other people build things. And the sorts of things that we currently think of difficult, building apps and services, the next generation are already starting to find easy. They're starting to, learn at school. And so You know, that's the hope for the future, really, that having done the hard yards to do all the data integration, other people can now leverage it. You know, please go out and get a key on transportapi.com, use the free stuff, build stuff, and you know, change the world.
And Nikki Margaret, I mean, what questions would you ask of people who've been there? Well, Margaret, you've sort of been stuck in the middle of this anyway, right? But Nick's new. I know Nick's new to this. But from your perspective, what would you ask?
My one would be how you actually get traction with the institutions and actually encourage change, because that's the hard part of iCity so far, isn't actually the technology, and it's not necessarily getting enthusiasm from developers. It is within the organisation, getting them to really understand the potential of what this could offer going forward, particularly at a time when people are kind of retracting their braveness, is what I would say. You know, like a few years ago they were braver than they are at the moment.
Well, even with Boris and his hair, they're being a bit shy now.
Okay. Well, I mean, we've got the Smart London board, which will hopefully bring some more advice in and actually start getting, because I think the bit that's missing is actually the business case for all of this. It's that if you invest in this much, this is a potential returns. And that's where I hope that my team can add some value. But it's also, that's the language of government, is you're going to invest in something, what's the returns going to be? And this brave new world of just trying things out is, you know, it's a very difficult challenge for us.
As a taxpayer, I think that's brilliant. As a technologist, I think that's terrible. You know.
Yeah. But we answer to the taxpayer more than the technology.
Indeed. Yeah.
I suppose the key question, I mean, this is all focused on public data and the public sector and releasing the data, and I think, you know, Jonathan and Emer actually have done a fantastic job of getting that to happen. The interesting thing for me now is actually getting the so-called private data out there, because interestingly, we're all producing this data exhaust as we go about our everyday lives, and Ken talks about this in his book. But actually, there's a huge amount of data which Google and Apple have now secreted away that actually, as from a smart city point of view, you desperately need access to create the, you know, a complete understanding, to actually end up finally with a big data model. And I think that's going to be the interesting challenge now, is how these guys go after Google and Apple.
Yeah. So breaking the walled garden down, I mean, that's a trivial task, right?
Well, and the other thing that's always amusing is people do worry, you know, about how much data government holds on them. You know, to which my response when I was in government was always as if, right, compared to what your mobile network operator knows about you, or Google or Facebook indeed. And we're in interesting times, therefore, you know, as to who holds the power in terms of those data wars. And I don't think it's the state.
Data is going to be critical in our society. We've already seen, you know, all kinds of examples of how data is now driving politics. Look at that whole episode around closure of heart operations at Leeds Hospital. Yeah. That was all about data. And we're going to find that kind of data-driven policy decision happening all over the place. What we therefore want, it seems to me, in this country is lots of innovative new companies building on data, so that we don't turn data expertise into a structural import, so that we can only get it from Facebook, and we can only get it from Google. You know, we're aspiring to build a business that facilitates and enables lots of interesting, innovative things to happen around data, which is based here, owned here, driven by our priorities and our hopes and aspirations. So, you know, we want to build in the UK.
So Nick earlier on said we don't need more data scientists, or something like that. Do you think we need more data scientists?
It wasn't me, it was the other Nick.
No, not that. I wasn't accusing you.
I think we need many more, yes.
Right. Show of hands, how many people think we need more data scientists? I'd ask you to keep your hand up if you are a data scientist. Oh, no. I'm sure there's the last question. Oh no, I don't want to ask one about security and privacy, because there is one up there. Another one right at the back. Oh, look. One more. We'll go right to the back, and then
shout. Shouting's all very well, but the live stream won't get it, unfortunately.
Yes, that's
unless you can shout very loud.
Yes.
Thank you. Alison Williams from Dunhumby. We work with retail and consumer shopping behaviour data. One of the things we're thinking about at the moment is how we can make that data available in a useful way. And one of the challenges we have is with the kind of imperfections of the data. So if there are gaps in the data or questions over the quality, our worry is that the frustration that could cause would actually undermine the value of it. So is it worth releasing it or holding it back until you can deal with that? I guess the example that would be relevant for you is if you had only 80% coverage of your bus network, would actually the 20% that's missing cause so much frustration that it's better not to release any of it? So how do you deal with that challenge?
But that was one of the very first things that we agreed in the first workshop for the London Datastore. That Debs came up with a phrase, go ugly early. So, don't let perfection be the enemy of you good. Just get it out there. And what the offer was that they would help us improve. And they said, don't worry about formats as long as it's not in PDF. We will work together to make this better, which was a fantastic offer. And I think once you put stuff out there, we had the example with Matthew Somerville's map of the tubes underground, mapped. And that really didn't do anything except surface something. But it created such excitement and interest. You force out the other 20%. So if you've got 80% and it's good enough, then you should release that, because you will stimulate activity and collaboration that will increase demand for the other 20% and potentially help you improve the 20% or the 80% that you already have. So I would just say go ugly early and see what happens.
This is the most common argument put by data owners. And every database administrator, every owner of data will always say, it's not quite good enough to go out, But that's 1990s thinking increasingly. What you do is you put the data out and you're honest about it. This is what all these monopoly data providers have been doing for years, and the way in which they've been getting it wrong. They've been trying to achieve a certain kind of perfection, which is spin, to put a particular view across. And that's not allowed all the creativity and knowledge that's out there to integrate with the data and bring new insight. So what I would say to you is put your data out there with all the appropriate caveats and say, help us make more sense of this. And all sorts of interesting people will appear that you would have never connected to in any other way. It's often been said by people that sometimes the person who has the most expertise in your data doesn't work in your place. And so you need to find them.
Yeah. So you heard it here. Go ugly early is the call. I'd like to thank the panel for a very interesting session.